Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evaluation in Equity, Ask the Experts. My name is Dr. Isabelle Kingsley. I'm the Senior Research Associate at the Office of the Australian Government's Women in STEM Ambassador, who is Professor Lisa Harvey-Smith. Now, I'm joining you from Eora today, also known as Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. I also want to note that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the Women in STEM Ambassador YouTube channel very soon after the event. Now, we're here today to chat about evaluating equity programs and for you to ask your evaluation questions. Now, we'll be covering a lot about evaluation, why it's important, but I wanted to start by talking about the vision. So our job at Australia's Women's STEM Ambassador is to make science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM, really a place for everyone. And obviously, we're not alone. There are hundreds of programs across Australia who are also trying to tackle the many barriers that girls and women, non-binary, and other underrepresented groups face in STEM education and careers. Now, in 2019, the Australian STEM sector got together with, under the leadership of the Australian Academy of Science and the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering to create a bit of a plan or a roadmap to guide our efforts in increasing girls' and women's participation in STEM. This plan is called the Women in STEM Decadal Plan, and it had 6 recommendations, and one of which was to make sure that all programs are evaluated so that we can know what works. Now, part of this recommendation was to create consistency. So basically, create a consistent national evaluation framework that everyone could use and that would guide everyone's evaluation of STEM equity programs across Australia. The other part of that was create transparency and openness. So basically publishing and sharing programs and their evaluations on a national platform, a national repository to really sense check what we're doing, identify any gaps, and know what works so that we know where to invest our money and our time and resources. So our office took the lead to address this recommendation with input from a lot of our friends across the STEM sector and with support from the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources. We built a suite of free evaluation resources. So we created a national evaluation framework, and we created a place to build and to share evaluations publicly. I had the pleasure of leading the development of this work, so I'll be giving you a little bit of an overview of that later on in the session. So what the session's going to look like. So today we're going to chat to leading expert in evaluation, Associate Professor Eric Jensen from Warwick University in the UK. I'll then show you some of our free resources, and we'll keep plenty of time for the main event, which is the Q&A. So throughout the session, you can pop your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Now, I'd like to welcome our special guest, Associate Professor Eric Jensen. Eric is a social psychologist with a global reputation for impact evaluation, specifically in science communication and public engagement with science. Eric's worked as an evaluation trainer, an advisor, a consultant for government departments and agencies and public engagement institutions all over the world. Just a few of those include the European Space Agency, CERN, the Arts Council England, and the Association of Science and Technology Centers. And then on a bit of a personal note, I was lucky enough to get feedback and advice from Eric on my PhD thesis, which was about evaluating science communication activities. So it's an absolute pleasure to have him with us today. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, happy to be with you.
Thanks for joining us. So, Eric, do you want to give us a little bit of a background about you, who you are, what you do, and how you came into working in this evaluation space?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I was just thinking today about the first evaluation that I did as a consultant was in 2007, looking at the Cambridge Science Festival in the UK, and it was an impact evaluation. So it was a event-based impact evaluation, and since then I've done a lot of impact evaluations around the world. I think my core interest has stayed the same, which is I want to know what works. You know, we have this really important work that we're doing, and there's finite resources to do it. And evaluation gives us this way of clarifying what's effective and what's not effective, so that we can do things better going forward. And that's a kind of it's always interesting because it's difficult to predict exactly what's going to be effective. You can kind of get in the general domain of what's likely to work, but to get precise about what actually is effective in real life, you do have to actually measure it, evaluate it. So it's a very interesting space.
Yeah, and that's a good point because we have the best intentions, right? We create programs, we think, okay, well, I have this objective. I want to increase girls' interest in STEM, or I want to increase the number of women in senior leadership roles. So I'm going to do this because I think that it's a good idea. I think it works, or other people are doing it. But really being able to measure that and knowing if it is achieving what you want to achieve, that's really important, because it's not always the case.
Yeah, I mean, the quotation often comes to mind of the road to perdition is paved with good intentions. That it's very easy to have things that are very well-meaning, that kind of sounded good on paper, even sounded good to the funders, not actually work in reality, or even do damage. So that's why it's really important to be testing and ensuring that things actually work, not just kind of patting ourselves on the back that we are all good people who must be effective because we're good people who want the best for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of what Australia is trying to achieve with the Women in STEM Decadal Plan and our efforts in gender equity in STEM, I said that part of the recommendations for evaluation was to have a consistent kind of framework. Why is consistency so important when it comes to evaluation? Why do we need a consistent framework to begin with?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit complicated at times to get it exactly right when it comes to measurement tools. There's a lot of existing, well-established knowledge in the social sciences about what makes for a good survey question or a bad survey question, good interviewing technique or not. There's a lot of kind of information, knowledge we can use from the social sciences, but it's not realistic to think that every practitioner who's doing STEM engagement work is going to have that information to hand or have been trained in it fully. So the opportunity we have with establishing consistency is to invest in a kind of a smaller number of projects to get things right, to kind of do the extra work, to get high quality measurement tools, especially, and to then use that information widely, so that not everybody has to become a social scientist like me, that we can just kind of enable efficient use of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I would assume that a lot of the people who are joining us today are people who are running equity programs in their organization, in their business, but they're not social scientists. They're not evaluators, and many of them. I mean, when we started this work in evaluation, I spoke to a lot of people and consulted a lot of program people who run programs, and I said, what do you think of evaluation? How does it make you feel? And they were like overwhelmed, daunted, like it's I don't know what to do. I feel lost, right? People don't really know how to go about it because that's not what they do in life. So I guess bringing that kind of consistent framework just helps everyone running these programs know where to start and have that base that they can use to be able to evaluate their programs effectively, without having, all the knowledge and experience that they feel they lack.
Yeah, it basically kind of reduces some of the heavy lifting involved in doing high quality evaluation. It's kind of an information subsidy when you have some good tools and templates ready to go that have already been tested and refined by experts, so that you're not having to create it from scratch or just kind of guess by, I mean, what often happens is people will kind of Google what else has been done to measure this thing and then just kind of gather up questions, whether they are robust or not. And so it's better to just kind of, for a field, to admit that this is a challenge and deal with it head on from the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another thing that we're trying to encourage here in Australia is to really, bring some transparency, some openness, and really have a culture of sharing evaluations, because sometimes people feel like it's a little bit of a competition. Well, I'm doing this and other people are doing this, and I can't tell people, if I've evaluated my program, what came out of that evaluation, because I need to keep that knowledge to myself. But sharing is so essential, especially, I think, the stuff that doesn't work. Because not every program is going to be perfect. Sometimes you're going to evaluate a program and find out that it didn't work, or that it had unintended consequences, or that if only you had done this, it could have worked better. Why is it so important to share and not be scared of sharing our evaluation findings?
Yeah, I think the important starting point is to acknowledge that none of us are perfect, and we're not going to be able to develop the perfect program or activity ever, even after a long period of improvement. So we have to kind of start with a level of humility that we're, even if our institutions are high prestige and, we have high prestige funders, that doesn't mean that we're going to be doing perfect work, that we're all just doing our best. We're all estimating based on the best information we have. And then we need evaluation evidence to improve and get better. So I think it's, first of all, the kind of cultural expectations, that kind of recognizing that a culture of overconfidence and assuming 100% success is kind of the death of learning and improvement, that we need to acknowledge our limitations. And just as in science, we need to have a view that everything we know is provisional and ready to be improved and changed, next week with new evidence. So that kind of attitude is the most fundamental, I think. And then when you have that attitude, evaluation can play a really useful role in orienting. And it's easy to kind of lose track, when you're a professional in an area, it's easy to kind of lose track of your original values and motivations for why you got into this in the first place. And the kind of cycles of applying for funding, justifying funding can kind of take over, and you kind of lose that sense that the point is to make things better. And that means not just your own institution getting better, but others who are working on the similar challenges that are important for the world, that they also are able to learn from what you've done and make things better themselves. So kind of trying to reduce the ego dimension, reduce the kind of overconfidence, and have a kind of open sharing attitude, I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I I also know though, a lot of people might be listening to this and in the back of their heads, they're like, yes, but if I tell my funders that what I did didn't necessarily work, and I report that to them, I might not get more funding. And then I can't continue to do the great work that I'm doing. So I think it's important when we talk about that cultural shift in our way of thinking about evaluation and finding out what works, is funders need to be part of that cultural shift and really embrace and encourage the people that they fund to be open and honest about what they find, and that they don't expect to only fund projects that will be 100% successful, but really value honesty and that improvement process, that improvement cycle that comes with program and program evaluation. So I think funders really need to jump on that bandwagon as well.
For sure. And I mean, having talked to a lot of funders, they recognize that no program's 100% successful. They know they're being lied to basically in a lot of the reporting, and they do want a kind of acknowledgement of improvement. So an improvement story in your next funding application is more persuasive than everything was perfect, implausible kind of story. So it is a useful thing for funders to say that more explicitly. I've encountered them kind of saying, "What? We never said we wanted 100% success stories. We want the improvement," but they don't say that enough, and they need to say that much more explicitly. But I don't think people should be concerned that a story where you say, we found these things last time didn't work so well, so we're adjusting them this time based on our evaluation. That is an excellent story for a funding application. A much better story than everything was perfect last time, so we're replicating it exactly this time.
Yeah, I agree. What are some things that, you've been working in this area around the world, like you said. What are some things that you've seen in this space that are just really interesting, or that have worked really well? Like who out there is doing evaluation really, really well?
Yeah, that's always the hardest question I get when I'm delivering training on evaluation. But there are some kind of initiatives that I would point to that are interesting in this space. So one of the older ones was in the UK, something called the generic learning outcomes. And this was an effort to try to synchronize objectives for impact across the museum and kind of museum related sector in the UK. And that had some success. Like the terminology started to synchronize. People started to recognize that they were actually talking about the same thing when they were doing measurement. The problem was they were too broad and generic, so they didn't actually help when it came to evaluation specifically. And you had too much of kind of people taking these generic learning outcomes and turning them directly into like survey questions, in a way that's just not plausible. So that, and then there have been similar efforts along those lines that have kind of improved things a bit. So the Science Foundation Ireland has made an effort to clarify for their science engagement activities the kinds of outcomes that are the priority, and so that helps when the funder provides a very clear steer about exactly what they're looking for, and provides that in as much detail as possible so that it's easier to translate it into evaluation terms. And then finally, I wanted to mention this initiative in the United States called COVES, which is a project. It started as a project that was funded by the museum and the museum kind of funder in the US, that was developing shared evaluation instruments that a pool of science centers were using in common, and then they've kind of expanded out to a wider pool, and they're kind of sharing findings. And it's all kind of built around a shared set of measurement tools so that they're able to have a shared conversation about what's working, using similar terminology and talking about the same kind of outcomes because they're using shared measurement.
Excellent. And I think that we have put the Coves link in the chat for everyone to check out. But yeah, again, I think that from what you're saying, that shared kind of consistency is really, really helpful. In terms of the generic learning outcomes, I'm quite familiar with those. And they did inform and form part of the evaluation resources and the framework that we developed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show everyone some of the evaluation tools that we've developed. They're available and free for everyone. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview and a tour. And then once we've done that, we'll come back and we'll have a Q&A. So you can ask us your questions. And I know that there's already questions coming through. But let's have a look at our resources. Okay, so I assume you're seeing here we go. Okay, so you've been seeing our Women in STEM Ambassador website. So let's take a look at some of our resources. So you can see here the framework that we developed, which is a 5-step framework. So we have, define your program goals and audiences, plan your activities and evaluation, design how you will evaluate, then execute your plan and share your findings. So first, we'll take a look at the evaluation guide. So Evaluating STEM Equity Programs Guide describes the 5 steps that you just saw there in detail. So there's some, detailed information about each of the steps, lots of examples, links to useful resources. Again, as you can see there, lots of examples from real equity programs. So you can see there, that's the STEM Women online directory. So examples throughout. Then we have the appendices, which have useful tools and templates. So here you have the evaluation planning tool that you can fill out as you plan your program and its evaluation. It's all color-coded with the different sections. We also have templates for things like how you'll manage your data and keep it safe, consent forms for your participants if you have participants. Everything that you need is there in the guide. Now let's take a look at the STEM Equity Evaluation Portal. So the portal has 2 main reasons that you can use it: when you can search and discover programs and evaluations, or you can evaluate your own equity program. So let's have a look at the search function. So here you can search programs and evaluations. We currently have a bunch of evaluations completed by different organizations in the portal that you can view. So some have been completed, some are still in progress, as you can see with the little green and red dots. So to search, just search the relevant words in the search bar, for example, STEM, and the relevant programs will appear. You can bookmark them. You can view and more detail about each of the program evaluations that interest you. So you can see there the indicators, the instruments, the findings summary. You can even go further and read the full evaluation, which contains everything in there. And you can contact the people running a program via email by clicking on Contact Us. Now, to evaluate your programs, this page contains all the information about evaluation basics, but if you're ready to evaluate, you click on that big button. You'll need to create a user profile. I'll just log in. And so you have all your settings here. Now, when you are ready to create your program, you'll start with the program overview, where you need to enter some details about your program. So the name, I'll be walking you through the Future You Australia program, which is our program here at the Office of the Women in STEM Ambassador. So you put in all of your information, and then at the bottom, you'll see that there's also those additional resources that you can download. And then you get started with the first step, which is the define stage. So that sets the scene for your program and its evaluation. It prompts you to define your goals, so what you want to achieve with your program. All you need to do is select the options that you want that apply to your program from the drop-down menus. So it's all there in drop-down menus. We created these menus from the Women in STEM Decadal Plan and a really big, thorough literature review, and we came up with this list of goals. So you select the goals that you want to achieve, and then you'll be prompted to identify the overarching problem that your program is trying to address. Now, the options displayed in the drop-down menu here only relate to the goals that you selected above. So some of the drop-down menus throughout this process are dependent on your previous choices that you've made. This just helps with consistency, like we were chatting about earlier. And it just makes it a little bit easier for everyone who's planning their evaluation. Then you define your program audiences. Again, they're all here. In our case, students, educators, and parents are the audiences for our Future You program. So there we go, teachers and educators. Now we're gonna move ahead to the next stage, which is the plan stage. So plan stage builds on the previous stage. Here you'll identify the program activities, inputs, and outputs, but what I really want to jump down to is the indicators. So indicators are the markers that demonstrate the change. You can see there that your goals that you chose in the previous stage are already there. And then defining your indicators is quite easy because we've done all the work for you. So everything is there. You just use the drop-down menus and select the indicators that you want to measure. In the design stage, you'll decide what data collection tools you're going to use. Again, we've made it as easy as possible. So the indicators that you selected previously are already there. And the drop-down menus show you the data collection tools that relate to that specific indicator. So for example, for us, for Future You to measure gendered perceptions of career choice, we chose to use the Youth Insights survey. So if you click on it, you can view the survey. The document is there. It's got all the information, all of the questions that you can go through and check to measure gendered perceptions of career choices. So it's all there. And so you can just go through and select your data collection tools based. It just brings a lot of the guesswork. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of things. So you can see there we've chosen to go with a few different surveys, and we pulled some different questions out from different surveys for our Future You evaluation. Skipping ahead, it's time to put your plan into action and execute it. This step guides you through how to ethically carry out your evaluation. But skipping ahead just a little bit further, it's the final stage, which is share. It's the most important. So here you can report on your evaluation findings. Now, if you don't have evaluation findings yet because you're just like in the planning phase, that's fine. Select no, and you can come back to it down the track when you have findings. But if you've finished your evaluation, you select yes, and then you'll be prompted to complete the reporting section. You see all the indicators you've previously selected are right there, so you just type in the findings for each of the indicators you selected. You can upload any supplementary materials like your survey questions, your ethics approvals. You might have a shiny formal report in a PDF that you want to upload here. So you can do all that. And then finally, you can export a PDF of your evaluation that you've just created to keep in your files or to share with others. So everything you've just created is right there, and you can save that to your computer. Then the last and most important step is you can publish your evaluation on the portal for others to learn from. So even if you don't have evaluation findings yet, you can still publish your evaluation plan. It really brings accountability and visibility and transparency to your program, even if the evaluation isn't complete yet. Then your evaluations will be available on your dashboard. You can unpublish them, you can edit them, you can add collaborators, all that stuff. But there you have it. Here's a bit of a whirlwind of all of our evaluation resources that we have created to really make evaluation easy, create that consistency, and provide on the portal the transparency and openness that we're looking for, so that we can, all of our efforts can come together and we can really work together to achieve gender equity in Australia. Okay, so we've got heaps of time, which is what I wanted, a good 15 minutes for questions, and we already have questions coming through. So I'm just going to pop my questions here. All right, so the first question: how can we successfully evaluate our programs through longitudinal studies with participants under 18 years of age when we have no way of tracking their participation or knowing what other programs they've been involved in? Could we collaborate together with some kind of unique student identifier? This is a really good question, really, really hard question, and something that comes up every time I talk to people. Eric, do you have the magic answer?
Well, I mean, we do a lot of longitudinal impact evaluation. I have a nonprofit called the Institute for Methods Innovation, and we do a lot of impact evaluation that's longitudinal and with people under 18. So I mean, if you're not allowed to collect any unique identifier from the students at all, that makes it more challenging. But the way that we normally do this is we kind of create a unique identifier. We assemble it from information that the student would know. So it could be something like they enter their first name, their teacher's first name, their kind of month of birth, like a set of information that they would be able to remember each time you collect data from them. And then our system pulls out a set of part of those details so that it's not able to be traced back to the same individual, but we can have a unique identifier. For example, it might be the third letter of their first name, the fourth letter of the teacher's name, things like that, to assemble a unique ID for that individual. And then we ask them each time the same questions, and we're able to match up their data across the 3 or 4 data collection points that we do. So that's how we've solved that problem in a number of impact evaluations internationally. If you really have no possibility to do that, and you absolutely cannot have any information about the individual, then you're kind of in a different category. So the traditional longitudinal impact evaluation, you would be tracing within individual how somebody has changed. But theoretically, you can do a longitudinal impact evaluation at the kind of population level. So then you need to be very careful to make sure you have a representative sample. So for example, if it's a school or a class, you need to make sure that you have a representative sample at each time point, and then it's valid to compare across time points. It's just that there's less statistical power when you go to analyze that data, because when you have within individual data, almost any variation is genuine variation and change and impact. But when you have a population level, you have to allow for some leeway that there's going to be some random variation in the mix each time. And so it's a little harder to find real impacts that are there when you run statistical tests under that approach, but it's a perfectly valid approach, assuming you don't have kind of weird distortions like, for example, it's a much more appealing prospect to complete the survey at the beginning than at the end, and then that means you're only getting the most dedicated students at the end. Things like that can distort the results, but in principle, that's a perfectly legitimate approach.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, it is so hard, especially the within individuals, having, creating that unique identifier so that you can track that same individual and any changes for that specific individual over time. And then there is also the part where, you know, knowing what other programs they're involved in, other, like, so many things can influence change for any individual. It's so hard to control all of those other things that could be going on. So it's hard, it's complicated, but it's definitely not impossible, and there are ways around it.
Yeah, I have published some longitudinal impact evaluations where we went back in one case, 12 months later, another 2 years later. And what you do in those later measurement points, but first it's important to have the pre and post to isolate the experience itself.
Yeah.
But the later evaluation points, you also include measurement about other things that there'd be good reason to think could have an effect. So for example, if you're doing an impact evaluation of science intervention, then you'd want to ask about other science-related things that have happened in the intervening period. And then you can run statistical tests to see if the presence or absence of those is predictive of differences. So you can isolate the effects of the intervention versus whether there were other things like they went to visit a science center repeatedly over the intervening period. If that kind of comes up as predictive in the statistical test, then you know that there are other things going on. And so that's the tradition. That's the way you do it. It's not perfect. It doesn't control for everything, but it's a kind of best available method.
Yes, and if you do have that statistical knowledge, there may be people watching today who are social scientists, who are researchers in universities, who have that capability and that knowledge to run fancy statistics, to you pull out those nuances based on different factors and things like that. And then for other people who just, that's way beyond what they're either capable or comfortable with, or even have the resources for, I think just running an evaluation and assessing the more short-term or immediate impacts of a program, is still really important and really, really valuable. And I don't want anyone to think the first question, which is like quite difficult and quite complicated, not every evaluation needs to be, a very in-depth, kind of complicated exercise.
For sure, that's definitely advanced level.
That is. Question number 2. I'm curious to know what this tool made specifically. Was this tool made specifically for academics, or is it applicable to any program that would involve STEM learnings? So I'm assuming that we're talking about the suite of evaluation resources designed by the Women in STEM Ambassador, and that is definitely not only for academics, quite the opposite. It is for anyone who runs an equity program that is sitting there going, I don't know how to evaluate my program because I'm not an evaluator and I don't know what to do. That's for you. It's 100% designed for you. So it leads you through, like I said, we've done all the hard work. It takes a lot of the guesswork out, the thinking out of it, and you just literally need to go in there, especially the evaluation portal. You go in there and it's drop-down menus, and you just kind of go, we're doing this, and then it's all linked to. It's really hard to go wrong, because everything is dependent on the other things, and all the hard work has been done. So definitely not just for academics. It was purposely built for people who don't know how to evaluate and want to evaluate, but don't know where to start. Next question, are there any communities of practice or associations or conferences for program evaluation in Australia? Okay, or yep, I mean, Eric, I don't know if you know, in Australia or in New Zealand, somewhere close by, what are the options out there?
Sorry, I don't know.
There are different, so I know of it's the Australian Evaluation Society, I think is what it's called, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's an association for evaluation and evaluators. There are definitely some conferences. What I can do is I can have a little bit of a look and recommend some things and pop them either, if I've got little elves in the background who can pop things in the chat. Otherwise, you know, get in touch with our office, and I can help anyone who needs more specific ideas of conferences to go to. How common is it for programs to have the capacity to run statistical analyses on evaluations? I think Eric, this is like, how common is it for people who run programs to be able to do all this fancy statistical modeling and analysis? I'd say not very.
Well, I mean, statistics covers quite a range. So
yes.
that like running an average, a mean, is not so unusual. You know, so measures of central tendency are pretty common. But inferential statistics, where you assess whether something is statistically significant or not, yeah, that's a very small percentage of the evaluations that are done that do that, and that's kind of an unnecessary limitation. I mean, some of the statistics, like running a chi-square test, for example, is one of the basic inferential statistics. It's pretty robust to violations of assumptions, and it doesn't take long to learn how to do that. So that's quite a long distance from like full-scale multivariate statistics and modeling. I would say most evaluations can get along just fine with the kind of the low end of the statistical tests. So I mean, in the case the problem with only running a measure of central tendency, so for example, saying our average score is higher after than it was before, is that you would expect some level of variation from just doing 2 measurement points on any pool of people. So just because it's higher doesn't necessarily mean it's higher to a level that there's a real effect in the, that you can kind of say, okay, this is something that's really going on here. And then the level next to that, so if you did find a real effect, you need to know how strong is that effect? What's the magnitude of that effect? That's called effect size. And those 2 pieces of information are really critical if you're going to make a claim to say there is a real difference, a real effect here. So sometimes it's incredibly obvious. I mean, if there's like a massive difference from beginning to end, from pre to post, but if it's kind of in a gray zone of where it's only a small difference, then the statistical tests are quite helpful for clarifying, is this just noise? Is this just random variation? Or is there a good reason to a good level of probability to think that there's an effect here?
Yeah. I would recommend, so the evaluation guide covers some of this. So if you want to have a look at the evaluation guide, there's in the execute section of the guide, there is a little bit on statistics and statistical analysis and just different ways of kind of looking at how you can analyze your data. And it's very, very basic. It's very user friendly. It's, not scary. So have a look at the execute section of the evaluation guide. And again, if you need help if you're not sure, if you're like, this is learning how to best write or create questions to analyze students' change in perspectives from pre to post. And additionally, when specifically focusing on evaluating a particular course or workshop, how can we control for perspective changes that may be occurring during the other equity serving organizations or groups that a student may be also taking part of? I think that comes back a little bit to the first question.
Yeah, the one point I'd make is, because it's the most common problem I see, is to not, if you're trying to assess impact, to not rely on self-report. So don't ask people, did you learn today, or did your STEM attitudes change, yes or no? That's not a legitimate way to measure impact. You would want to directly measure the thing that you're interested in. So if you're interested in gendered representations of STEM, you measure that concept directly. You do that before and after, and then you compare whether there's been any change from before to after. That's the kind of the biggest issue that I see in measurement. And I just wanted to mention, I do have a book that I wrote called Doing Real Research, a practical guide to social research that was intended for people who don't have a social science background to kind of get up to speed on things like running a statistical test. So it provides a plain language, jargon-free explanation of these things and how to do them.
Yes, and I can say that it's very, very good. I used it. I used it during my PhD, and I still go back to it. It is very simple, plain language, not overwhelming, well-written book. So I do recommend that definitely. In terms of questions as well, instead of creating questions, one of the things that we kind of encourage people to do is to use things that already exist out there, things that, survey questions that have already been created by experts in those fields. If you use the evaluation portal, the STEM equity evaluation portal, as I showed you, you can find the questions to the things you're trying to measure. So if it's a change in perspective, you can probably find a survey that's already written that you can use. So you don't have to create your own questions. You can just literally use the questions that have already been developed. They've already been tested and kind of validated by the people who have written them, and they're right there for you to use. So again, if you use the portal, it makes it easy for you to know what you're trying to measure, and then what instruments, what surveys you can use to measure those things directly, pre and post. The next question is really good. In our experience, the requirements of doing proper data gathering for evaluation purposes competes directly with providing a good user experience. Oh, I just noticed what time it is. So this is going to be the last question. God, time flies. So more questions increase drop-off rates. So any advice on innovative examples and case studies where it's done really well in balance so that it doesn't impact on that good user experience?
So yeah, I mean, this is always a central concern when I'm designing an evaluation, is I want to make sure that the evaluation is not detracting from the experience itself. The most direct first step is to make sure it's not too long, so that you're not asking like a huge battery of like 30 minutes of questions. The other thing is there are some kind of creative approaches that you can use. One with kids that I use a lot is annotated drawings, where I ask them to draw whatever comes to mind when they think of whatever the kind of target focus is of the evaluation, and then to put names and labels on everything. And they do that before, they do it after, and then I score the difference from before to after to see what features have changed in their representation. So that's something that's kind of a fun activity for them to do and doesn't detract at all. You could argue that it kind of augments the experience itself. Otherwise, another technique I use is to move the evaluation data collection outside of the experience itself. So doing it like the day before, the day after, for example, that kind of approach.
Yeah. Another way that I sometimes do it as well is I use those interactive polling software. So things like Slido. So during a workshop or an experience, people can contribute to word clouds about something that I've asked, or answer a question before. Previously, with some of these workshops, actually, I've asked people, "How do you feel about evaluation?" At the beginning, and it creates a fun interactive word cloud. Everybody sees it. And then I ask again at the end, or I have a few questions, and it keeps the workshop or interactive, but it also provides me with some data that I can use to assess those things. So there are creative things out there that you can do and that you can use to not affect the user experience. So we've gone a little bit over time because somehow 15 minutes completely flew by. Really, really great questions. So thank you for those. So I want to end this session by thanking our guest, Associate Professor Eric Jensen. Thank you so much. Everything that you spoke about today really resonated, and it's just really helpful. So thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science and Resources, again, for their support in creating these evaluation resources for you, and all the work that we do at the Office of the Women in STEM Ambassador. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I encourage you to visit our website, visit the portal at evaluation.womeninstem.org.au. Take the next We've got 5 minutes before 1 o'clock before your next meeting or your next engagement. So take that next 5 minutes, go there right now, create your account. It'll be there when you need it, but go and create it right now, and then get started on planning and evaluating your equity program. Because if we're going to create change, then we need to know if our actions are working. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.